So just to let you know that you probably know this, but I did an article for Etc. on this, how to have a civil political discourse. And the reason I did the article was because they were going to do an issue in Etc. on politics. And they asked people to submit articles if they had them on the subject. And so I decided, well, I'll do one on civil political discourse. And actually, the Institute is coming out with a book in the next year or so, where they're doing a collection of those articles, and it'll be a book on politics, and I guess maybe taking that issue and converting it into a book. So that's so be on the lookout for that. So that'll be kind of interesting. Okay, so that's what we'll be having. Okay. All right, so we could start out, with simple stuff. What is civil discourse? Okay, so a civil discourse is a willingness to listen and be open to someone else's opinion. It's the ability to disagree without being disrespectful, and it's a willingness to search for common ground in a discussion, and a willingness to be equal partners in a conversation. So that's good, and it would be great if both parties to a conversation would agree to these ground rules. Typically, that's not the case. If you want to do it, that's fine. It's, getting the other person on board can be tricky. But even so, you can have a civil political discourse, even if the other person is not into it. At least you can try to have one. It doesn't always work, as you probably know, because if you're there with a real partisan who, whatever you say, you're wrong, he or she is right, they have the facts, you don't, you're not going to have a civil discourse because they're not interested in that. They're just interested in having an argument. And some people just really like to argue, even in marriages or relationships. Some people just get off on the energy and the adrenaline it causes. You probably know people like that. And there it's, difficult to probably next to impossible to have a civil discourse. And so why bother? You can talk about something else. The politics can, spark all kinds of stuff. So typically what I do, and probably you do too, is when you have someone who's not interested in, talking civilly about politics, you move it to something else, sports, because there you can argue all the time about anything, and there are really no facts. My team is the best. No, my team. That's fine. That's good-natured sports. Or even if it gets terrible, just the weather, etc. Anyway, but this is civil discourse. So what isn't civil discourse? So it's a debate with winners and losers. So if you try to be a winner in a conversation and make the other person the loser, it's not going to be, civil discourse. Giving up or caving in, that doesn't lead to discourse. You're waiting there to make a retort. This is sort of like, I think they call this the ping pong theory of communication. Someone sends some communication over to you, and you're just waiting to hit the ball back. You're not really thinking much about it. You're not really listening attentively. You just want to get in what you have to say. And that tends not to have a political discourse, and an attack on free speech where basically, you keep sort of canceling the other person or not really wanting to listen. Okay, so you're probably familiar with the term the semantic environment. That's the environment, sort of what Korzybski called, the organism as a whole in the environment. So it's the entire environment. It's not just the words. It's the nonverbal communication. It's what's going on in the physical environment. All these are important. And someone who talks about the semantic environment, I'm guessing is someone you've heard of. Perhaps you've read the book Amusing Ourselves to Death by Neil Postman. If you haven't read the book, read it starting tomorrow. I mean, it's that good a book. I'm a little bit biased. Postman was on my dissertation committee, but he wrote this book, Amusing Ourselves to Death. I think he did in 1984, sort of to commemorate, the Orwell novel 1984. And it's really a brilliant book. I mean, it's such an important book, still in print, that pretty much every journalist, every significant journalist in this country at least, has read that book. and Postman is frequently quoted. As a matter of fact, Postman really predicted the first Trump election, even though he died, I think, in 2001 or four, I forget which, but he died way before Trump came to public prominence. And his basic point in the book is that TV, because he was writing in '84, so we really didn't have social media, but his point was TV has really dumbed down the public and really put a kibosh on critical thinking. He talks about, back in the 1950s, when people would be reading about things. So they read newspapers to get news. And, reading takes a certain amount of concentration and critical thinking, whereas watching TV, doesn't. I mean, a cat can't read, but a cat can watch TV and be fascinated by it. And it's sort of a passive way to get information. And so with the public basically watching a lot of television, he felt that that was the start of people not wanting to think critically, but wanting to be entertained. So one of the points in the book is we've become an entertainment culture. And I think what I'm saying that he predicted Trump's election was in that first election back in 2016, Trump ran against Hillary Clinton. And Hillary Clinton was a very good debater. And so educated people who watched the debates would say, oh, well, she just killed him in the debates, which was true maybe on the merits. But he killed it in terms of the entertainment value. I mean, he'd say these outlandish things, and people would go, oh, my God, it's crazy. But it's entertaining. And people would, and the media covered him because he was so entertaining. And the media, these televisions certainly, is about entertainment. I mean, they call it a news show. So, Postman's point is on television, when you come in with a new show, you have music that introduces the show, you have sound effects, even on BBC must do it too, but, public broadcasting, it's not all, but a lot about it is showbiz. And so Trump was far better than his opponent, certainly better than Biden. Poor Biden was really a terrible communicator, which really, I think, well, that and immigration, I think, cost him the election. But anyway, but please get amusing ourselves to death. And the subtitle of that book is Public Discourse in the Age of Show Business. And also, had Postman been around, he would have written about social media, which is coarse and discourse. Because on social media, you don't even have to identify yourself. So you can make all kinds of crazy comments and vicious comments anonymously. So that's a problem. So here's the cover of Amusing Ourselves to Death. This is the anniversary edition, I think. And there's my little thing on social media, which I think I'm not the only one. It's course in public discourse. Okay. So the art of communication, and certainly it is an art, the role of emotion. So in general semantics, we don't talk about the emotions and the intellect that they're separate. This is sort of a hyphenated situation where emotions hyphen intellect or intellect hyphen emotions, they kind of go together. As a matter of fact, there's a psychologist, I'm hoping you're familiar with, Albert Ellis,
yes,
who actually gave one of the, RET. Now it's, I think, what is he called? REBT, Rationally Emotive Behavior Therapy. They threw that in. And he thought it was a good idea. And Ellis actually presented at a Korzybski Memorial Lecture back in the early 90s. We invited him, and he gave a talk. And he talked about how General Semantics, he was amazed to find out about it. He found out about General Semantics after he propounded his theory of REBT, which, if you look at it, is very similar in many ways to General Semantics. He just puts a more practical spin on it from a psychological point of view.
Yeah, I always thought he based it on GS. That's interesting.
Well, he didn't, in the sense of when he did his theory, according to him, and I believe him, he said he didn't come across it till after he propounded his theory. And he said he wished he had come across it earlier. it would have made it. He still had said his theory. Still, he said is superior in the sense of it's an economical way of using GS with people in psychological situations. But he said he wished he had come across it earlier. And his talk really was about how grateful he was to learn about GS and how important it is in the work of a psychologist, certainly in the work of an REBT psychologist. So I thought that was kind of interesting. But certainly in the art of communication, the emotions are important. It's not just what you say. It's what surrounds what you say. And in general semantics, we recognize nonverbal communication, your body language, tone of voice, all these other things. I think I came across a statistic somewhere that 85% of face-to-face communication is nonverbal. So, when you're talking to someone, people are looking to see that what you're saying is congruent with your nonverbal communication. I mean, if you're saying to someone, I love you, okay, not really. Anyway, so that's important, nonverbal communication, and the importance of listening. So certainly in general semantics, we realize that that's really important to listen to a person, and also to communicate the fact that you're listening to someone. One of the things that I used to do when I was in counseling and talking to people and explaining how they could show respect for the other person was if you're listening to someone, you could sometimes paraphrase what they're saying. So someone says something, well, so what you're saying is, and then you try to paraphrase, and then they'll say, oh, yes, that's right. Or they'll say, oh, no, that's not what I meant. But you're also, no matter what it is, you're showing them that you're listening to what they're saying because you're trying to explain to them what it means to you. So clearly you're not daydreaming or zoning out. You're actually in the ball game, they're listening. So that's important. So that's one thing that I think is good to do in terms of having a civil communication. Also, there's, the limitations of either or thinking. So, often they do this on TV a lot because TV news shows, these talk shows, they're all about conflict. So it's like the Democrats say this, the Republicans say that. So that in general semantics terms, it's like elementalistic, or either or thinking. There's only two sides. There are two sides of every issue. Of course, we know in general semantics that's ridiculous. There are multiple sides to issues. It's not just this or that. So certainly you can be aware of that, and probably the other person isn't. And one of the mistakes I made, I remember when I first learned general semantics back, I think in 1978 or 9 is when I was introduced to it, is I thought it was so amazing and so world-changing that I really wanted to share the gift of general semantics with others. So I would often in conversations say, oh, well, what you're doing is either or thinking or this and that. Oh boy, was that a mistake. The best way to turn someone off is to do something like that. You really can't impose whatever it is, even though they benefit by it. Okay,
yes, I think Catherine Minter in her book discusses that with her young pupils.
Oh, that's right. Wow, Catherine Minter, boy, you guys really are into the classics. Wonderful. Haven't heard that name in years.
I was going to say, with that, trying to engage someone else, you're among friends here.
Oh, good. Okay, there you go.
We've all tried that, and it has failed.
Oh, okay, so you can't proselytize. People have to come to it slowly on their own, and if they're interested, you can fill them in.
That's right. You have to do the Baha'i faith style. It's up on the shelf behind me if you're interested. That type of thing. They don't go knocking. Don't go knocking on doors and doing it like the Jehovah's Witnesses would come to say.
I like that analogy. That's good.
It's very clever. It
is. I'll remember that one.
You're going to have to want it.
Yeah, that's right. I agree. So this is emotions versus intellect, and of course it is, and it's both. But and this is the importance of nonverbal communication, which I think we know about this in general semantics, but it's always good to be reminded of things. Someone once told me repetition is the key to learning. So I thought, okay. The importance of listening, active listening. Yeah, it's interesting. When I first learned General Semantics, the fellow who was doing the course, a wonderful guy, had a big position. He was the vice president of a major corporation, but he just loved General Semantics. And in his spare time, he would, teach it at all these different institutions. And I remember he was into hi-fi back in the day, hi-fi stuff. And he said, listening is so important. And when you were in school, you take speech courses and, how to give a speech and elocution, all this. But other than maybe a course in, listening to music, we don't really take listening courses. And he's right. And actually, in the States, I don't know if they have it there was a society called the Institute of Listening. And they would do papers and all kinds of things. I actually joined them for a while. It was very interesting. But listening is so important because most of the communication in face-to-face even or whatever is listening. So, it's important to at least to show a person in a conversation that you're actively listening. Limitations of either or thinking. Well, and we all, General Semantics know how limited either or thinking is. Mm. So back to the art of communication. So in terms of having a civil political discourse, this first one I think is probably the most important. The value of delayed reactions. Wow, when it comes to general semantics, I think that for me, the two most important formulations, the map is not the territory and delay your reaction. I mean, that's helped me so many times.
The thalamic
right?
pause.
That's right.
Yes.
That's right.
Very valuable.
Thalamic pause. Yeah. It is. And particularly in political discussions, because so often there, someone pushes your buttons and you read, and one has the instinct to want to instantly respond. And often that involves escalating, conversations into arguments, and of course this stuff gets serious. I mean, I know people, I'm not in that category, thankfully, where, people have cut off family members and friends because of political discussions. And I'm thinking, is it really worth it? I mean, why don't you just talk about something else? You have so much else to talk about. Oh, I can never be friends with someone who's a Trump supporter or who's a leftist. Sure you could, but just don't talk about those things if it's going to push buttons. Talk about other things. And I'm getting a lot of practice out here because I used to live in New York City, and then for the pandemic, we moved out to, I don't know if you're familiar with the geography out here, but Long Island is adjacent to New York City, and it sort of goes, east. And so we're sort of on the east end of Long Island, and where I am, it's Trump country, which I'd never really been around. So many people were supporting conservatives because in New York City, where I was, everyone was a Democrat. And if the Democratic candidate won the primary, you didn't even have to bother voting in the election because he was going to win. But out here it's the opposite. So it's fun for me because I'm meeting so many people that have different political points of view. And so I'm tested in conversation all the time because they're not just rubber stamping what I think. They're often diametrically opposed, which actually is better for me in terms of it's more challenging and actually more interesting.
You're well challenged.
Well challenged, yeah, well challenged. And actually, sometimes I try not to do this, but you think, oh, how could they? It's such a stupid thing to say. How could they think that? But then, as I talk to people, and as I myself get more educated about things, I can see how they can think that. People say, oh, they often I hear, at least here, they say, well, they're voting against their self-interest. I don't know if you've heard that. No, they're not. They're voting for their self-interest. They're just not the same self-interest you think they should have. Often it's economic. Oh, they're voting against their economic self-interest. That may be the case. But their cultural interests trump their economic interests. And so that's what they're voting for. And that's rational if that's your standard. You know, economics is only one part of human existence.
Yeah, I think
So,
it seems like you're drawing them out on the motivation of that particular view.
Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly. They're working on a viewpoint, a map, and the map is not necessarily correct to the territory.
Yeah.
That's right. Although, what is the territory in politics? It's not like you know, it's not like a piece of land
No,
where we all can see the land.
but it is a model. I mean, that's the question: is what model are you working off? Which is, and to me, I usually go, well, that's an interesting thing. I wonder how they're going to get over this. You know, in other words, here's something that's in the real world, and that view works contrary to that. Have you examined how that would work?
Oh, that's interesting.
In other words, I've sowed doubt.
Well, okay, you have, or else, or do they come back and say, make up how it would work?
It's like a big king.
Exactly, they just make up whatever. But you can tell whether they're really
Yeah.
thinking or whether they just, as you said, emoting a whole lot of stuff they've heard on television.
Oh, that's right. Often, that's right. Often, at least when I'm in discussions here, I can make their arguments as well as they can. And because I've watched Fox News, so I know the talking points. And somehow, you know, people are real partisans seem to want to just make the talking points that they hear on TV or social media. They think they're almost like they're working for whatever show they're doing. It's it's tough to get people off the dime if they really just are so blinded and are just going in one direction. You can still have a civil conversation, but where is it going? What's the point of having the talk to begin with? You want to have a civil conversation.
Yeah,
I think that's something one wants to consider.
yeah.
Yes.
Why are you doing it?
Yes, my motive often for talking to people is to find a divergent point of view. And my frustration often is that I can't find anyone who disagrees strongly with what I think. And I talked to my cousin, you know, who he and his wife go to, or used to go to Israel every year to volunteer at the university there. And they're strongly pro, not so much pro, they're Christians, but they're pro-Israeli. And I ring them up and ask. I try not to argue with them. Well, I don't argue. I refuse to argue with them, but I ask a lot of questions. And generally, at the end of the conversation, for example, I say, "And what do you see as the future of Israel in the next 5 years or the next 100 years?" And there tends to be a long silence. And eventually they say, "Oh, well, what I see is perpetual warfare." You know, one of the saddest sort of responses that I have in conversation. Anyway, I like having conversation with my cousin because his views are so different from mine. And the same with someone at the men's shed here who, you know, who's pro-Trump and a climate change denialist and so forth. The whole package of views there that seem to often go together. And I'm much more keen to talk with him if I can than what I see is probably going to happen this afternoon at afternoon tea, where another couple and ourselves will spend a couple of hours agreeing with each other about how dreadful everything is, you know. And I walk away and saying, well, I haven't really learnt much from that. So
that's interesting.
Yeah, so specifically looking for people with a different point of view and asking questions, I find can be quite valuable.
Yes, it's challenging.
Yeah. But also, you know, in terms of Trump, so, you know, people, oh, Trump's are horrible. Well, look, as a human being, in terms of his values, I think they're pretty bad. But if you go issue by issue, many Democrats agree with Trump on certain issues like immigration.
Yes.
Many center Democrats agree with Trump, not totally necessarily, but agree with Trump that really some of these folks who came in here illegally need to be sent back. That's an issue that lots of Democrats think is okay.
Yep.
So it's not just, blanket Trump is no good. This whole DEI thing we have in this country with diversity, equity, inclusion. Many middle of the road people don't like that policy and agree with him that it ought to be cut down significantly. So when you don't just talk about the individual and sort of make an ad hominem argument, oh, he's no good, or she's great. Okay, so that's just sort of what are you learning? But if you take issues and really go over the issues, you can often find that someone you don't particularly like has some issues that you kind of partial to, and someone you like may be on the side of issues that you're not. So one of the ways to have a civil political discourse is you can look at issues rather than as the individual that is proposing the issues. I mean, that's what a lot of Republicans would say too. Oh, Trump, we don't like Trump as a person, but he's on the right side of issues sort of, he's anti-abortionists in this country. Well, Trump was willing to, Trump doesn't really, I don't think care one way or the other about the issue, but he was willing to promote pro-life because it brought in a segment of voters that he needed. And so they backed Trump, even though they didn't particularly like him and his values, but they liked him on that issue.
Yeah.
So
he certainly comes off as a typical politician in regards to a sellout. Will blow with the breeze like a flag. Blow whichever way the wind's blowing.
Right.
So I do hope and pray that there's enough members of the US Congress who will carefully look at each of the issues and vote according to that rather than blindly following a charismatic leader.
Although I doubt that's going to happen.
Yeah, that's right.
There'd be ramifications
I think,
if they did that, wouldn't there?
Yeah, always. There would. Well, with Trump, it's so interesting. He's such a powerful. His base is so powerful that what he does is, or what they do is, if a legislator goes against him, someone else will go against that legislator in a primary election and be to the right of him or be to the Trump side of him, and that person will lose often because the electorate, at least wherever they're running, is pro-Trump. So no matter what they think, if they want to keep their job, it's sort of a craven position, but okay, they'll just go along with Trump because that's the best way not to have a primary opponent. Which means that Trump, it's sad because you have people that in the past you'll get some spirited debates about stuff within parties. You get that sometimes in the Democratic Party here, because the Democrats have sort of a more left party and a center party. So also the center and left are in conflict. In a way, that's what sort of doomed Biden, because when Biden took over after we defeated Trump, what he did is he loosened the immigration policy that Trump had put into place. And so that's when you started to have way more people coming into the country. And I think he did that because the left, the extreme left, wanted him to do that, wanted to have more open borders. I don't know how well he felt personally, and I guess he felt he needed them. But I think had he actually come in with a very hard immigration policy, and of course, had he not had his physical and mental decline, which is just unfortunate, but let's say he was still able to be fairly healthy, I think he would have beaten Trump. I think this election was, they say it's about the economy, but my own view is, I don't think so. I really think it was about immigration and these DEI issues with the far left. I think the far left of the Democratic Party really led to Trump's victory because the country was so against their policies that they weren't voting for Trump, they were voting against the far left. Yes. And so it's on them, but that's my, I've heard other people say, well, it's the economy. People look at the economy. Well, that may be the case. I don't think anybody really knows.
Question,
anyway,
Yeah, just a point here though. We keep talking about politics is a locus of control of left and right, and it's very easy to be railed onto that diagram, shall we say? And I think that that also limits the discussion because it doesn't actually say that very many of these leaders or leadership often have pick and choose from a variety of elements that are left or right leaning elements, but they are much more complex. And I think that's one of the issues in our discourse in politics, that we tend to put it on this, very often put it on a singular plane of left and right. And I mean, the rhetoric comes up, particularly in America, of, communism and socialism are the worst thing ever that can ever happen, and they're used as a threat, as if that anyone who is slightly left-leaning is going to go off into, beyond Bernie Sanders, shall we say, which is one of those silly constructs of saying a little bit of balance in Australia is what we recognise as being a little bit more sensible.
I think it's a lot more sensible if that would be the case. And by the way, Bernie Sanders I would consider Bernie Sanders pretty much extreme left. I think many people in this country would consider him extreme left. I think had he run in the election instead of Biden, he would have been severely defeated.
Yeah.
Sadly, although I'm not sure so sadly. I'm not. I have my Bernie Sanders, like all politicians, promises a lot. It's just, where do you get the money?
You mean like promising that the Ukraine war would finish in 24 hours after he became president? And here we are several days later, there's no difference.
That's right.
Well, Trump would promise. Yeah, well, Trump is almost like in a sui generis, in a unique category. And part of it is, this is a really good book. I did a book review of this. There's an American professor, he passed away recently, called Harry Frankfurt. He was a PhD in philosophy, and he was a professor, and he wrote a book called On Bullshit, a small book. And he did an academic study of the subject. And Trump really fits into that so well as a bullshitter. And the point of the book was, one of the points is a bullshitter, because people always say, oh, Trump likes to lie. And the point of a bullshitter is not that they like to lie, they like to bullshit. So whether they're telling the truth or lying, it makes no difference to them. What they want to do is, whatever they say is they want you to agree with it. So whether he's saying, the sky is blue or the sky is purple or the sky is multicolored, it's meaningless. What he wants you to do is, yes, you're right, the sky is blue. Yes, you're right, the sky is multicolored. So Trump says all these things in a way just to see, will people be loyal to what he's saying? And in fact, they are. I think many of the people know what he's saying isn't true, and they'll defend it, but they don't care.
Eating the cats and dogs.
Yeah.
Just a point in your slide 8 that you've got there with the heart and mind. The interesting thing that I've noticed with Trump's rhetoric is that he always connects. He puts a superlative at the front of a statement. So a superlative, and I would often repeat the superlative because to me that it highlights that how he attaches emotion to the fact or the element that he wants to talk about. And this thinking feeling aspect reminded me of the ABC diagram years ago, where we would look at an emotion would trigger trigger your buttons. Basically, you'd pick where your button is being pushed, and then you look at have a thalamic pause is the next step, and then what you're able to do is then work out where that chain of inference, where you were triggering an emotional response to whatever it is that was being, you're realizing that it was your generation of the emotion, not theirs. They've just used a word that's triggered you. And it's very interesting how he always connects a superlative and emotional superlative at the front of any statement that he makes. So it always repeats the emotion or the superlative. It's very interesting that you can start to deconstruct the information. Because I'm always asking the question, why is it disgusting? Why is it such and such? And all of these terms to say these are just words or situations that probably he doesn't have any connection to, but he will always put these emotional connections to, you know. So anyway, it's a fascinating element of observation of what he's done of late.
That's a good point. That's interesting. It's a nice analysis. That ABC sounds like something that Ellis does with the ABC.
Well, the ABC diagram was looking at signposts of emotion. So picking at, you know, what you'd be in stride with teenagers or something and realize that there's an emotional thing that's triggering you. And it's a button, your button. And if you recognize that, you have a thalamic pause and go, well, where does that come from? And then you're able to then at the end reflect back to the person, look, when you use that word, I keep thinking of such and such, and it bothers me because, and these were some of the tools that we were using in 1986, 87, in regards to looking at emotional trigger points. And very often it was interesting flipping it and looking at it at the political rhetoric and realizing that this thinking feeling, because I mean, my area working in film and television production, I started in advertising, and advertising has changed over the years to be more, it's driven by emotional points now. I mean, like you don't even put up the argument, you know, in any logical situation. You turn it into like all these home ads are all about all these emotional things. I'm going, you realize that they're intangible, you know, they're intangible because everyone has a different feeling, you know, a different response, but they're making it as if it's like they're gaslighting you into how you should think.
That's right. No, that's
so funny.
No, it's an excellent analysis, I think. That's right. And that's the reason. I think emotions have been in advertising for many, many years.
Oh,
yeah, I mean,
but it almost is con man level now in this political discourse. As you're saying that it's very, very much the bullshit artist is the con man, you know, and the con man is going to, what is he going to use the best tools he can? An emotional, you know, tying an emotion to a thought, to a process is very, very, how would you say, today is far more valuable to persuade people rather than a logical discussion.
That's right. And of course, Postman blames TV and social media and Murdoch for a lot of this. Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense.
We don't call Sky News here. I call it Sky Opinions because it doesn't work as if like Fox News in the States could not be considered as news. It could only be considered as opinions. So right. Really should rebadge it as opinions. And they do say that it is an opinion show. And you go, you know, opinions are wonderful, but they're just like, as a philosopher friend of mine said, his father called it chin wagging.
Yeah, well, that's right. Well, but yeah, of course, you know, you read opinions in newspapers, right? Op-eds and guest essays and stuff like that. Yeah. And everyone has an opinion. So that's right. So it's so interesting, you know, on TV. When I was living back in the day in New York and Greenwich Village, there was this entertainer, and I think he came from Britain, Quentin Crisp.
Oh yes,
remember him? The Naked Civil Servant. He wrote a book. He was a really flashy, just a gay guy, but a wonderful entertainer. He did a show once, and I'll never forget the line he said. He said, "You know, you don't want to be watching television. You want to be on television." And I thought, wow, that's right. I could do these news shows. I could be a guest on the news show, and you could ask me my opinion, and I give you my opinion, and it'd be just as good as 90% of the opinions of these experts, because what do they know that I don't know? I mean, I read the paper, they read the paper. I mean, it's not like chemistry where you really have to sort of know some technical stuff. It's just general stuff. But anyway, sadly, I never had my own TV show. Okay.
Well, Quentin Crisp was also known to say the statement that that after 7 years, the dust doesn't continue to pile up.
I remember that. I'm thinking it's 5 years, but you may be right on 7.
Home cleaning.
I told that to my wife, and she said that may be good for Quentin Crisp, but you're not going to get away with that. Yeah, that's right.
Well, that's right. Well, the idea that if anyone complains about housework, it was the first thing I remember. I say, well, I'm told Quentin Crisp said that after 7 years, the dust doesn't pile up anymore.
That's exactly right. That's a great line. He said it in the show, I emotionally resonated with that line.
That's
right.
Anyway, sorry, yeah. So we'll get back onto our art of communication. Sorry, we're a lot of fun.
The art of that's what we're communicating now. This is part of the art. So anyway, so delayed reaction. So of course the idea is not let other people press your buttons, which is can be fatal. Not only in political discussions, anywhere. Once you let someone push a button, and of course words said in anger, you can apologize, but they've been said, and the person's going to remember them, and you do your best to try to ameliorate the situation, but it's best not to say them in the beginning if you can avoid it. So in other words, also the next point is, telegraph opinions by qualifying your statement. So if you say something, this is of course in general semantics, to me, in my opinion, as I see it. So you're telling the other person this isn't, a fact in terms of a first order fact. It's my opinion, and they say, well, you could have your own opinion. It could be different than mine. These are opinions; they're not facts. We're not arguing over, what the people do argue alternate facts. But we're not arguing over basic facts. We're arguing over opinions we have, and we're all entitled to our opinions. And of course, then this is the tough one: establishing facts. So it's tough to have a discussion where your factual base, or what you're basing your opinions on, are different than the other person's factual base, what they're basing their opinions on. It's almost impossible to have a discussion where the people aren't talking about the same set of facts. And you can bring that up and say, look, if you're saying, Cleveland has X amount of people, and I'm saying Y amount of people, and we're talking about that, unless we can establish a baseline where we're both talking roughly about the same facts, we're really not going to be, where's the discussion going? It's like we're talking to ourselves. So it can be helpful if you can establish baseline facts, and of course do it in a sort of a kindly way. Oh, you can't say, oh, you're wrong. What do you mean? Look at Google. This is what it says here. They're out. Once you do that, they're not going to listen probably. And then of course bypassing. You probably know this Irving J. Lee in the bypassing, where he talks about someone says something to you, and you reply because you think you've understood what they've said, and in point of fact, they meant something else by the word they used. Postman gives an example in his book, I think, with using the word love. Someone says, I love you, and you think, well, they love me, so, they're only, it's a dating situation. So they're only going to be going out with me, because that's your definition of love. If someone loves someone, well, the attention is on you. And their definition of love is, I can love you, and I can love Jane, and I can love Molly, and that's just who I am. I can love different people, and that's their definition. So one of the things Postman suggests is get an operational definition of love as soon as you can, so you know what you're dealing with. And so that's not a bad idea. So if someone says something about whatever it is, democracy, well, what is your definition? How do you define democracy? Or how do you define whatever it is? And see if you can come up with an agreement on the definition of the term that works for both of you. And this way you get rid of the bypassing, where you're thinking what they're saying is how you would respond, and they're thinking what you're saying is how they would respond, and you're both missing the boat because what they're thinking is different than what you're thinking. So basically, to get out into the open, it's sort of assumptions. I'm more fascinated
I found
with assumptions of what they say. Go ahead.
I found a really neat trick to be able to get those assumptions is by putting an incongruence question by saying, how do you mean? And they, so if they throw up a definition of something and I'm wanting to know more about it, I will throw that in the ring to say, basically, I've made it sound incongruent. In other words, I want to know more, but I want in that sort of context. And it's interesting because it just stops them in a gear to go, okay, hang on, I have to define what it is I'm throwing out rather than just simply assuming you're on the same page, shall we say, as a metaphor.
I like that. That's interesting. Yeah, I think that
just an incongruent question that kind of says, I'm interested in what you're saying, but I'm going to make it sound like I'm really not getting it. And then that gives them an opportunity to tell me more about the model they're working with.
Right. And it also shows you're listening to them. So it's a double win. Yeah, that's interesting. Okay, then beware hardening of the categories. So I like that, so just don't put a person into a box and assume because you're putting them into the box that you already know what they're going to say. Or you're assuming they have a set of thoughts that are pre-programmed because you've seen them before. Just hear what the individual is saying, and it may be that they fit into a particular category, but at least keep an open mind to something like that. You don't have to automatically, because it'll stop you from being more creative in the conversation if you automatically categorize them. I think.
Yeah, and then people will react just to the category, don't they?
Yeah. The manga thing is a bit of a pigeonhole that people are being shoved into. So if you agree, even if you agree partially with Trump, you get shoved into that little pigeonhole. And it's very interesting to, I find it fascinating when you can actually show the gray area of their own thinking. They don't agree 100%. And that's the way to weasel them out of that. Oh, don't put yourself in that category. You don't have to be in the pigeonhole. You can actually come out a bit,
I think that's great. And what happens, what happens here is particularly folks in quotes on the left in this country. And one of the things that sort of Trump supporters had problems with those on the left, and often even in the left, is if you would say something, you'd automatically be categorized. Oh, well, that's a racist thing to say, or something like this. And so you don't say what you think because you're worried you'll be put into a negative category, and you're sure your thoughts are being canceled, and you can't have a more open and what you think is an honest discussion. And so people, I think, resent that they can't do that. And I think that's another reason some people voted for Trump, is because they really weren't voting for Trump. They were voting against people that they felt were not allowing them to communicate what they wanted to communicate, because then they'd be categorized negatively and that could have consequences. And they did to their self-interest, it wasn't economics, it was they wanted to be free to say what they wanted to say without being castigated.
Just a point about that too. Also, it's so easy to be labeled. We're labeling. We're talking about categories. What I've noticed that in all of the American news feeds, they'll always put in an R or a D to just remind people where they're from. And I'm thinking, my gosh, the labeling is just so rife. This idea that, as you said, if you just wanted to be, you didn't like your representative and they happen to have a D or an R, there's your label. Quick, vote the other way.
No, that's a great. There's something called libel by label.
Yeah, laudable by label. Wow, that's very nice.
Stuff in a category.
Libel by label. So you call a person a racist. So where's it going to go from there?
Yeah,
racist. But then that's it. The conversation's over. Or you'll defend it. No, I'm not a racist. So the whole thing becomes around the category. It really kills the conversation. And also, you'll have ill will if you label a person that way.
Yeah.
The person doing the labeling is simply creating an enemy.
Yeah.
For what purpose?
Isn't that the old rhetoric of when you single out the idea of early Nazi Germany and so on? The idea is you label someone and then you call them out. At the moment, there's a discussion in Australia on anti-Semitism, and the thing that bothered me mostly is that by bringing up that these people in these areas are Jewish and highlighting that this is anti-Semitism, what it should be labeled as religious intolerance as a more broader construct, it labels these people and isolates them up. I said, you might as well have painted, the Jewish sign on their doors and so on by calling it out. I mean, isn't that anti-Semitism anti-Semitism? That's it. I mean, the American one was the Black Lives Matter. In Australia, that doesn't translate. It comes off as Black Lives Matter, so you can all go F yourself,
Oh.
And instead of by labeling, pulling people out and isolating them, has a tendency to draw on this idea of the categories. You become more aware of categorization, and as you said, that you can end up, that's it, the conversation's over before it's begun.
Yeah. I mean, once you pigeonhole in a category, and not only is it over, but I mean, if someone categorizes you and expresses that, you're going to, they created an enemy. I mean, there's this thing about Dale Carnegie used to be a popular thing in the States, how to win friends and influence people. And I think a lot of the folks on both the far right and far left ought to read the book. But basically, you don't want to go out of your way what's the sense of going out of your way to antagonize somebody? But then there's something, like this, I don't know what they call it in Australia, but here it's called virtue signaling.
Yes.
Right? So by doing that, you signal how good you are. I'm not, you're a racist, I'm better than you because I'm not a racist. I'm for, inclusion of everybody, you're not. So, I'm better than you.
Yeah.
And so once you people think you're better than them, they're not going to be happy about you. They're going to go against whatever you want.
That's quite a labeling of themselves, isn't it? Really?
Yeah, no, it is. And so
you get the gold stars out, give everyone a gold star.
Yeah, no, that's right. Yeah, if you're a kid, you win a gold star. If you're an adult, you win nothing but self-satisfaction. I mean, so much. I listen to the shows now on. We have a sort of a liberal channel here, MSNBC, and every night they simply go, "Oh, it's so infuriating that this happened and that happened. How can they do that? Oh my God, this and that." And Trump is simply quietly, or not quietly, whatever, he's doing stuff, and all the in quotes left can do is be infuriated. Well, that may make you feel good, and you may be morally superior, but basically, you don't have the power that you want to do what you want to do, and the complaining may make you feel good for the moment, but on a practical political sense, you're not advancing your agenda in any way. It's just venting to the choir. And of course, on TV, the people on TV are being paid to do this. That's why I always thought Quentin Crisp was right. I could do that on TV. I could get people riled up and do all this stuff, and I'd be paid. Okay. Why do I want to listen to them do it to me? Waste of my time. But many people don't feel that way. They like the idea that they can commiserate together. Okay. And but by the way, that's nothing wrong with that either, in terms of if you want to be in a group and you want to all complain. That's fine communication. I remember when I was a counselor in a junior high school, and I would meet with the kids, and the kids were having problems, and they would tell me things. And then I would have lunch with the teachers, and the teachers would be complaining about some of the students I would be with. And I would try to give the teachers pointers on how to deal with these students. And they didn't want to hear it. They just wanted to complain about the kids, and they didn't want to have lunch with me because they didn't want to hear my suggestions. And then I realized, am I an idiot? What am I doing? I'm just isolating myself and not helping the kids or the teachers. So I kept my mouth shut and just, sort of, when I could make a comment that I thought was maybe being acceptable, I would. But I wasn't going out of my way to instruct these people or, give them the benefit of my wisdom. They didn't want it. Okay, so this is, let me see, to cover everything here? Yeah, hardening of the category. So, okay, how to stop impulsive reactions. We're going to general semantics, the thalamic pause. That's a great formulation in general semantics. Establish facts, that can be tricky. Bypassing, trying to come up with a common definition, or, as they say in general semantics, an operational definition. Well, let's see if we can agree to talk about democracy, and this is what we mean, or you mean, or I mean about democracy, or whatever it is. These are highly abstract terms on the abstraction, the structural differential or the abstraction ladder. People talk about politicians, truth, justice, democracy. These are
democracy is different in different countries. Like the Australian democracy runs in a different way from the American democracy. Like
right.
We don't have primaries. Yeah.
Oh, you don't okay. Well, also even I think North Korea called itself the Democratic Republic of North Korea.
I know.
If there's democratic in the name of the country, it isn't.
That's good. Right. I think that's a good rule of thumb. Exactly. But anyways, it's really, but so you can use these terms, justice, fairness, unless you have an operational definition, what does it mean? Categories we live by. Okay, it's important to know how you're defining the category. And it's really important, to make sure that you don't automatically put someone in a category, because that'll limit how you think about them. So this is a little how to deal with difficult people. So, okay, so difficult people are people you find difficult to speak with. And so this goes to what this was taking the ABC model. So this is Albert Ellis, who was, the psychologist. And it turned out Ellis was a pretty well-known psychologist. I think in Psychology Today, he came in number 3 in the 20th century as a psychologist who was, well known. But anyway, his model was this ABC model, which I think is a pretty interesting one. So in the ABC model, he has what he's called the activating event. So someone calls you an idiot. Okay, that's the activating event. That's the A. So B is your belief about the event. So they call you an idiot. Now you could say, oh, well, how dare he? Ellis would say the way to get angry is to use the word like should or dare. So you say, oh, how dare he call me an idiot? Or he shouldn't be calling me an idiot. And so the moment you think like that, the emotion is anger. And so you'll then respond from that position of anger. And so C is the bodily and psychological consequence of the belief. Okay, so what he said, the next one is do not should on yourself, or masturbation. You say must, you must do this, you must do that. Because, his argument is you're not God. You can't control other people. They'll do basically what they want to do. I mean, so he said, rather than use the word should, he would say, you can say maybe, I would prefer, in your mind, you would say this, I would prefer that they didn't respond this way, but I don't run the universe. That's the way they respond. I'm going to have to deal with it. As opposed to more of a self-righteous should or dare, which automatically then brings up the emotion of anger, which means you'll respond angrily, and then they'll probably respond to your anger angrily, and the conversation spirals out of control. So I think that's a pretty good model, the ABC model. I mean, it teaches, right?
I think that Dr. Wayne Dwyer with your erroneous zones made a mention about shoulding, and he defined it as as a value system that you don't actually pay lip service to. So in other words, when you're saying should, often if you ask that who should, if you ask the question who, you might find that it's your parents, your people around you, or an assumption of how society works. And then you can ask the question that you need to immediately ask for yourself: do I agree with that value? And if I do, just do it, rather than talk about it in some sort of, theoretical construct. I should, meaning there's it's a list outside myself. I don't agree with it necessarily, otherwise I'd wholeheartedly do it.
I disagree. Yes.
What was that?
Yeah, I missed that also.
Oh, sorry, what did we cut out, did I?
Yeah. Okay. Well,
yeah, I was just saying that he's saying in the should was it was a value system that you don't necessarily serve.
That's interesting. That's an interesting thing to think about. Thank you. That makes sense to me.
Yeah, as I said, it was Erroneous Zone, Dr. Wayne Dwyer.
Oh yeah, I remember. Sure, I remember Wayne Dwyer.
Yeah, and there's a whole section on should and shoulding. The idea that you're addressing a value system that you don't necessarily wholeheartedly take on. So every time you hear yourself, they should, you ask the who said, where did it come from, and do I value that value system? And therefore, instead of saying I should, just simply do. Mr. Wayne Dwyer was a little bit, how do you say, proactive, shall we say?
No, that's true. I think Dwyer and Ellis, Ellis accused Dwyer of stealing some of his material. As I recall, back in the day. I forget what the response, but yeah, that's interesting. Well, I think that's an interesting concept for sure.
Yeah, I just thought it was when he uses a more proactive approach, he asked the reader to engage with themselves in their values and their value systems. And that was one of those little, how do you say, a word that we use that reveals that we might be running little rackets on ourselves, doing things that are avoiding doing what we really believe in, And if we either believe in it or we don't believe in it, that defines it very quickly.
Interesting. Yeah, that does make sense. Okay, and then the final thing is switch the discussion if you see it's going nowhere. So in terms of civil political discourse, as I said before, you can talk about sports or what's going on in the town you're living in or something else. But, there's no reason you have to stay in a discussion on politics. If you don't particularly like where it's going and people are getting upset or you're getting upset, what's the sense of doing it? I mean, you're never going to, are you really going to convince the other person in a political discussion? Two sides have different points of view. Or you really think you're going to convince that other person of your point of view? You might have them think about it a little, maybe, most likely not, but you could give it a shot. But, go somewhere else. I mean, does it really pay to get that upset about this stuff?
One of our prime ministers, maybe John Howard, was it, guys, talked about religion and politics and some other things at the time as barbecue stoppers. That is, you get in a row over a friendly barbecue about religion or politics or something, it sort of kills the whole event, and you're really not going to make any useful transformation of somebody else by doing that.
I love the barbecue stopper. I'm going to use that. We do a lot of. I'm from the city. I don't do barbecues. They do, but everyone else does out here. So I'm gonna have to remember that. That's a good one. Thank you.
That was actually explored in a television commercial where a guy.
Really?
Yeah, there was where he does says that he's I think it's anyway. The point was it's about whatever it was that I think is a banker. That's right, about banking. And so the idea that when he said he was a banking person, It was a barbecue. Everyone stops. The dog even as well just stops dead, you know.
Right.
But then he corrects and says, "Oh no, I'm with such and such a bank," and they go, "Oh, that's okay," and everyone continue on.
That's
With an
great.
ad for that bank.
That's right. Yeah, a quick ad for that bank. But it was so funny how this idea of the barbecue stopper, you know.
I love that. I'm definitely going to use that. Thank you. A barbecue stopper.
Stopper, yeah.
Perfect. I'll give you credit if I use it. Thank you.
John Howard.
I know the name, interestingly enough. I don't know why, but I do. Anyway.
He had a little trouble separating church from state.
Oh, well, here there's...
You probably know John Howard because of the ban on automatic weapons in Australia. He instigated
the amnesty, where that millions of guns and stuff was handed in. I don't know actually how many after the Port Arthur massacre.
And
wow.
1994.
automatic ownership of automatic weapons was banned.
1996.
Yeah.
Good for you.
It's pretty strict out here.
And that action is quite often referred to in American gun control discussions. I'll use the word discussion as an example of
can be done.
Something that's perceived, rightly or wrongly, as being quite successful in reducing gun crime.
Yeah, well, you know, gun
Australian
control.
model.
Yeah, it's a huge issue here, clearly. And then people, these Second Amendment people, because in our Constitution, there's the Second Amendment, the right to bear arms, although the amendment's worded so you could make the argument that only militia has the right to bear arms, which is the argument I would make. But our Supreme Court decided, I think by a 5-4 vote, that citizens could have arms. So, and it's probably not going to change at this point because there were so many guns in this country. It's just, you know, and particularly where I'm living out here, I'm probably the only one that doesn't have a gun. Everyone has guns here. And of course, you have these terrible shootings that happen every once in a while in this country, and then thoughts and prayers, the politicians, but nothing really changes. And you know, there's a sad issue here.
And the IA is a very useful group to have on your side of supporting you for political purposes.
Yes, the gun owners are, because they're useful in the sense that there may not be that many that are active politically, but they're strongly active, and they turn out to vote, and they turn others out to vote. Whereas maybe the majority of the country that it might be for gun control, it's just not that big an issue for them, that they're going to vote on that particular issue. It's not like an abortion issue if you're a right to life or that's the issue you're voting on. Gun control, if you really don't want it, then that's the issue you're voting on. If you want it, probably not the single issue that you're voting on. So we're stuck here with automatic weapons and like, oh my God, so many guns, so much stuff. Actually, I'm always surprised there's not more gun violence in this country. You know, when it happens, we go, how, you know, it's terrible. And I'm always thinking, wow, you know, I can't believe with all these guns, we're not having so much more of it.
Yeah. Well, I'm really surprised that gun ownership in Canada is quite high, similar to the States, but has less, which is extraordinary that they have a lot less gun violence in their country, which is, you know, an interesting testament to that, to just the societal perspectives and expectations. It's certainly a very interesting and challenging part. I mean, my challenge to this was to look at it and say, well, that more gun violence in the States is killing more Americans off. And I said, if you're a terrorist, you'd put money in the NRA as a terrorist organization because they're successfully killing off more Americans if that's what they want. You know, and you don't have to pick up. You don't have to pick up anything. You just put your money into where it counts.
You know, I like that. That's interesting.
It's my subversion perspective on the thing.
Good for you. I'm always good for you. I love subversive statements. That's interesting.
road devs.
It forces people to think about what they're talking about, and they say, "Oh,
It does.
I said, well, look, if you're a terrorist over in over in other countries, the first thing you would do is put money into the NRA. They're doing a more successful job at killing off Americans than terrorists overseas."
I know I've never heard that before, but I'm going to use it. That's so good. I like that.
Oh, please spread it around. I think they should.
Oh, I will. I will.
Think about it. You know, you're what they call it, enabling terrorism.
That's right.
In America, like making sure everyone has a gun. You know,
it's a great way to look at it.
Yeah.
And by the way, you're right about Canada and Switzerland. Because my wife's Swiss, we've been over there a lot. Everyone has a gun. You have to have a gun. They don't have a standing army, so everyone has a gun. Very low rate of gun violence. In Israel, everyone has a gun pretty much.
Yeah.
And a very low rate of gun violence. So in America, there's a high rate. So obviously, it's not just the gun.
It's a cultural thing. Yeah,
it is a cultural thing.
But that's why I use that subversion element of the NRA. Just so they get them a bit, because they seem to spend more time talking about terrorism than they talk about just guns in their own country. And you do realize that, you know, this enabling is just ridiculous.
It is. And also the amount of damage, guns, domestic, gunfire causes compared to terrorist attacks. We put so much money into preventing terrorists, as you say, from attacking, whereas, we're attacking ourselves.
That's right. And doing a better job at killing off Americans.
Well, we're Americans, so we do a good technical job on things.
That's right. And take it seriously.
We're hard workers, the Protestant ethic, we'll work hard at doing whatever it is. And
well, they're doing a successful job there. Very good.
That's right. That's good. Ellis would label that paradoxical intention.
Yes. I just call it subversion.
Well, I like subversion. It's easier to think about.
It's a semiotic discussion.
Yeah, well, semiotics is interesting. But anyway, the idea is to go from this to this. So that's the thing. So what I'm going to do is, so I've shown you the PowerPoint. Now I just got to see if I get up here and stop the share. Where's my sharing button?
Down the bottom, middle.
See down the bottom. It pops up.
It is.
Oh, no, top right is the word share.
Oh, the top right? Okay.
In brown.
To the right. You found it. Oh, to the right further. Keep going to the right.
Keep going.
Keep
You got
going to the right.
Comments and share.
Just down a little bit. Oh, no, back to the right again. Down a little bit. A little bit down. You're there.
This is mute.
Oh, you
share on my screen.
You know what it is? I don't know what it is, but my buttons aren't popping up on my thing here.
What we can see on the screen is record comments and share, where you were hovering over the share button. You said.
Well, tell me when you can tell me when I'm hovering. Is it there,
David? No, to the right. But we're probably saying something different to what you're saying by the sound of it. A little bit further to the right.
To the right here?
Yeah, to the right. Down a fraction, down a fraction, down a fraction. Click now.
Yeah, you mean?
Yeah, share.
Yeah.
All I'm getting is.
It popped up with a little.
Oh, no, I know where it is. No, I got it. Okay. Here it is.
Ah, there we go.
It was all the way down.
Yeah, down the bottom.
Yeah. It was on the bottom. It was on the bottom. Because often I do this thing with my iPad.
Pop-up menu.
Using the computer tonight. Yeah. Okay. Well, they say technology, I forget who said, it's a blessing and a curse. Obviously, it's a blessing that I'm virtually in Australia talking to you all, and it's a curse that I can't find the damn thing on the computer. But anyway, but that's my fault. So I'll say it's not even a curse on that.
Oh no, that's
inconvenient.
It's not your fault. You should read a book called Design of Everyday Things. And he shows that it's actually the computer designer's fault, not yours.
Thank you.
Of course it's not our fault.
That's right.
I blame myself too readily. Okay, I'll just simply blame. Thank you. I appreciate getting me off the hook.
Well, the idea, I think the better way in discussion would be to make sure that you say me and the designer both having incongruent discussion with this device.
Well,
I mean, to include them into the discussion rather than just blame them.
On everyday things.
Much more easy to discuss things.
I like that. Oh, I see. They're down below. A picture is worth 1,000 words. So design every. Oh, that's good. Oh, I like it.
It is an example of a stupid design.
That's wonderful. Well, if the book is as good as that is, that you judge a book by its cover, then that's a good one.
But that's a brilliant design for people who want to give up coffee.
Or you want to scold themselves.
It's always the context.
Well, you know, Stretch, do you drink? I guess you drink more tea than coffee.
Bit of both.
Bit of both. Okay, because you know here we drink a lot more coffee, and obviously we always associate tea with the English.
Yeah. Cup of
we
tea,
do a bit of both,
ills.
coffee and tea. Yeah.
Coffee and tea. Okay, well, actually, I drink both also, but for most people here, it's coffee. You know, had we lost the revolution, we'd all be tea drinkers. So there you go.
That was the problem. You see, you chucked all the tea in the Boston Tea Party.
I know.
Destroyed.
Well, it was really
what you couldn't drink.
What was the problem? The British. I mean, they just should have taken the tax off if they wanted to keep the colonies. It's just, even the people living in England at the time, they were taking the tax away from them. So why wouldn't you take it away from the colonies? So you know, and that war is on them, I'm afraid. And they don't even care. I was listening to a show. I listened to a podcast from England, and they're saying that they in history class they talk about the American Revolution for a week. For them, the big deal is the French Revolution. That's really changed the world for the English. So we lost the American. It didn't really affect the British Empire. In the 1920s, we were bigger than ever. So it really wasn't. And in terms of economics, they were more interested in the Caribbean with the sugar than they were with the colonies. So they said it wasn't that big a deal. Okay.
Yes.
To us, it's a big deal. To them, not so much.
Yeah. Ho Chi Minh was asked once, probably at the Paris Peace Talks in 1968, said, Mr. Ho, could you tell us what you think of the significance of the French Revolution? Oh, he said it's a bit early to say yet. He said.
Oh, he's an interesting guy. Actually, Ho Chi Minh. So we had, World War I. Ho Chi Minh was around, and Woodrow Wilson, who was the president, the League of Nations, make the world safe for democracy. That was Wilson's big deal. And Ho Chi Minh tried to see him and said, you want to make the world safe for democracy, Vietnam, let us be a democracy. And he never got the appointment. Which is okay, because he really was nobody back then, and so I can understand why he wouldn't be seen. Save you Mao Zedong, I think, tried to make an appointment. He never got the appointment. So they drifted off into communism, and as they say, the rest is history. So
they got categorized pretty early, didn't they, for a discussion?
They did. They absolutely did. That is interesting. But yeah, so but I guess politics, whether it's in this country or your country or whatever, people have the same sorts of arguments, I guess, at least if you're in a democracy. How long we're going to be a democracy, I'm not sure. But we're hoping for the best. We're hoping that 4 years goes by and this reign ends peacefully, and we move on to the next iteration of presidential power.
Yeah, I'm just hoping that in a way that if we have a break in what we say a very formal way of doing presidential and politics, that hopefully the Americans will crave to go back to, because at the moment this is what we call the Gemeinschaft. In art, we call the Gemeinschaft is based on the philosophers of the 1930s, where the German philosophers pointed out that we always hanker for the days past, all those things in the past, and at the moment Trump is selling the 1950s, which is the golden days or whatever. And every time I hear all of these terms, he's harking back to that period. And the Gemeinschaft is always a very typical way of doing things. So we've done it a lot in filmmaking. The insurrection, the film Insurrection, was started in that construct where they had this, this lovely little village and so on. And these are all harking to the belief systems of years gone by. If you ever lived in those times, they were just as bad as any other time, really. But that was what the
that's interesting.
Well,
no, that is interesting. I lived in the 1950s. One of the books, you were kind enough to show my website. I have a book, Brooklyn Boomer, because I'm from Brooklyn, which I don't know if you've heard of. It's sort of a part of New York City. Growing up in the 50s. And I just remember that being probably the best part of my life. But I was a kid, so maybe wherever you grow up as a kid, you don't have responsibilities. So it's a wonderful time. But basically, I did research on it also. And, for the white middle class, the 50s really was the gold standard. In terms of roles, men would go out to work, women stayed home. But for the most part, they weren't that unhappy because it just was expected of them. And they bought into the role. The men bought into their roles. Jobs were absolutely plentiful because, the United States came out of World War II in pretty good condition. The rest of the world was wrecked, right? The bombs and physical plants destroyed. So the economy in the United States in the 50s was growing at 3-4% a year every year. So if you're a white middle-class person, it was a pretty good time. The groups that really suffered for blacks, it was still segregation. And of course, gays, you just had to be in the closet. If you said you were gay, you were going to be fired by the federal government and you couldn't get jobs anywhere. So that's, but I think Trump's base is basically, white people. So they remember their fathers or whatever, or if they're old enough, they lived there. And that seemed to them to be the golden age, make America great again. That's code, I think, for make the whites in charge.
Make it 1950. Make it back in 1950. I keep thinking that film Blast from the Past with Brendan Fraser in.
I think it was a similar golden time here too, as far as roles and growth and jobs. We were doing pretty well.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. Actually, there was in 1950, the New York Times had an editorial that said the Democrats and Republicans were so similar that they were craving politics to be more divergent.
Well, there you go.
Well, they got one.
Well, no, and of course today, it's not the United States of America; it's the disunited States of America.
Yes, the aforementioned Prime Minister John Howard is characterised as craving for the good old days of the 1950s. As you say, the defined gender roles and all these sort of things, barbecues. Actually, there's a song that characterised Australia at that time: football, meat pies, kangaroos and Holden cars. And it was all quite grand and wonderful in our recollection. We didn't have the enormous gulf between black and white that you had in the US and even today. But Aborigines were pretty badly done by and so forth. But it was not such an enormous mainstream issue as it was in the US. So it was a pretty good time for a lot of us. Anyway, we got over the Korean War. That was a bit of unpleasantness, and things in Vietnam were not coming up to be terribly bad at that time. And the UN Commissioner for Refugees had like 2 million people displaced by World War II that had to be settled, and that was thought to going to take a few years. Of course, nowadays it's 80 million refugees in the world, or whatever, plus or minus a few tens of millions. So I think things were looking pretty good at that time. Great optimism.
Yeah, no, I think that's Trump's thing, and certainly, he did win the election. He not only won the electoral vote, he won the popular vote, and not by a lot. I mean, he says he has a mandate, which is not true, but he did win the popular vote, and we'll see what he's making all these executive orders and signing statements. Many of them won't happen. But again, as they say about the Harry Frankfurt thing, he just says things. It's a matter of, can he get these things through? Some of it he will. I mean, the immigration stuff, I think a lot of that will happen. But some of the other things, like this birthright citizenship, you can't do an order. It's a constitution. The Senate, our legislature has to make a law, and he's not even asking for the law. He's just pandering to his base by signing all these orders as if it's going to happen. And, things in politics don't happen quickly, if at all. But you can say things, and Trump loves to say things, and, that's his stock in trade.
Yeah, we have a program here in Australia called Planet America, and they pointed out that they think that when he signed all these things, it's like throwing spaghetti on the wall and seeing which sticks, as you said, he just does all his base, throws it up against the wall and see which sticks, and also I point out that he could also be running interference, where all he's doing is trying to keep people busy while he's trying to do something else. Because my question is always, as being a subversive, is to ask the question, what else are we not seeing? What else is the other issues that we're not seeing? That's the question. Right. It's not what he's concentrating on or getting us to concentrate on. It's what we're not seeing and what we're not hearing in terms of issues and things that are prominent normally.
That's a very good point. I mean, basically, Trump, I think basically, governing is okay, but he's really into money.
Yeah.
And he wants to really, I think, steal as much money as he can. And, he's got the Treasury, he's got all his friends in there. And they're going to do a lot of, they'll be economically okay because the federal government's got lots of money and now he's in charge. And I think his bottom line has always been money for himself. And so I think that's number one. I mean, what'll happen to the nation, he kind of cares a little bit maybe, but I mean, the money thing I think has always been the driver. So, because he still has all kinds of conflicts of interest with his businesses and, he just runs them.
Yeah, he's definitely the con man of just drawn by money. As the old saying of, knows the cost of everything, the value of nothing.
Yeah,
I wonder how he'll go when it comes to increasing the borrowing limit, which risks crippling the government every now and then when they want to raise from what is it now 36 trillion or so. He says, "Oh no, I need a few more to complete these programs." That's when the Congress and all that's going to have the thin margin is going to count.
But that's true. That may be a problem with some of the Republicans. Although when it comes to this stuff. Economics, I mean, it's not really a science. I mean, who knows how much you can borrow and there's no magic. 36 trillion, I mean, it's such an unimaginable figure. So would 39 trillion be, the end of the world? Probably not. I mean, it's all paper money anyway, so it's all just belief, not backed by anything. Yeah.
I think back to Alfred Korzybski's Manhood of Humanity. When was that? 1920 or so. I did an index of that book actually because I was frustrated that it didn't have one. It's on our website if you ever want to look it up. Yeah, but we've had some discussions of Manhood of Humanity, a great term, and a lot of us have great frustration that the socio-political problems that we have today don't seem to be illustrating a great improvement in the condition of humanity as such. Sadly, that book I think is rather simplistic. Korzybski, if you look back in it and see how the role of social media might play a better part in democracy and so forth, you won't get much guidance from that. So I wonder if we can, if you're looking ahead to the future of general semantics, if there's some way that we can foresee a better role in trying to consider the interaction between, in the North American case, between the US Constitution and the the administration and the courts and so forth, there must be grounds for hope. There's grounds for respect for the robustness of the US Constitution, I think, the way it withstood the events of the last 8 years or so, and give us some grounds for hope in the future. But the complexities of all that are not really discussed, I think, in a very mature way in poor old AK's book, Manhood of Humanity. Maybe we need a new one for the year 2030.
Yeah, we can't call it manhood because it's got to be personhood. That's a good point.
Adulthood.
Yeah.
Adulthood, yeah. Maturity.
Yeah.
Of humanity.
Yeah, and of course, Korzybski was an idealist, and but he's also practical. I mean, he wrote against Hitler in the 1930s. He took strong sides. He fought in the war, so he knew what wars were about. He's trying to, General Semantics is about preventing that kind of thing, helping to prevent it. And it's too bad more people aren't involved in it, but you never know what the future is going to bring. But the Constitution, it's not so much the Constitution's robust. Don't forget, it's the people interpreting it. So now we have a Supreme Court that's, a bit on the conservative side. They throw things out, and who knows how they'll interpret it, because the Constitution's only worth what the judges say it is. If they can throw at anything, I went to law school, so I realized, the law is one thing, but it's nothing till a judge makes a pronouncement on it. Then it becomes whatever it is.
Yeah, they're only human.
Sorry?
They're only human.
Yeah, that's exactly right. They're only human, and they come with prejudices and their own biases, and it's not like they're reading the law as robots. And whatever their prejudices and biases are, that's how they're reading. I did an article on this in a talk, I think, judicial bias meaning in the law, where I talked about in law school. I even said this when I was in law school. I said, we ought to have a class on judicial bias, and we ought to look not just at the law, but at the judges' personalities and backgrounds and how they made their decisions. And so no one was interested in that class. But anyway, I still think it's a good idea. And because the law basically is how the meaning is not like general semantics. The meaning is not in words, it's in people. So however the people think about these things, that's how their decisions will be made.
Yes,
so,
I'm rather amused by the concept of immunity from prosecution, which was a big deal recently in the Supreme Court, and the sort of related one that comes up, of course, this concept of pardons, which happens, of course, with every new president. A few high-profile ones with the insurrection and everything, and then, of course, the thousands of others which are normal. I went into ChatGPT, of course, font of all wisdom on all things, and said, what is the history of pardons in the Australian legal system? And it said, well, basically there are none. We don't have a tradition of that. Although there's a provision for it in the Constitution, it would have to come down more or less directly from the Governor General to the state, and then maybe to the state governors. But there's certainly clearly no tradition of it in terms of, the local courts and all that don't have, or even the High Court, I think, has no power. It would have to be directly to the government, to the governor. And there's no question of the elected Prime Minister or the Parliament issuing pardons. In the US, apparently, it comes back from who would it be, George III or somebody. When the American Constitution was being formulated, there's a provision for it in exceptional cases. But I'm sure the founding fathers then would have had no concept of how it would be used these days.
To say the least. I mean, look, Trump, I think, it's more or less a norm that you wouldn't, give out this amount of pardons. And look, Biden gave out thousands of pardons. Trump's, I think, were more egregious in the sense of the insurrectionists who were January 6th. He pardoned them and praised them. But Biden gave out lots of pardons for people that probably shouldn't have gotten pardons if he would have looked more carefully. But when they issued these blanket pardons to thousands of people, they're not really looking at specific cases. They're just giving categories. Like Biden said, I'm pardoning all these nonviolent drug offenders. And he didn't look at the cases. Thousands went out. Now, some of these nonviolent drug offenders were fairly violent. They just didn't get prosecuted on that. And there were some gang leaders and things like that. He pardoned them all because I'm not sure why. But anyway, he did. And of course, Trump also gave these pardons to these insurrectionists, who actually, attacked police officers. You would think that's the one group that he wouldn't pardon, but he did. I don't know if it's going to cost him anything. So I think it's a sad commentary on the citizenry.
Yeah, and the preemptive pardons for his own family members,
That's
just
right.
in case there might be politically motivated attacks, legal process against them.
How does that work? How can you pardon someone in the future?
Apparently you can.
Ahead.
Yeah.
Which means they cannot be prosecuted. Yeah.
Right. I mean, to me, it's a crazy system, but that's the way the system works, and people haven't done it because there was a norm. Or how, as you say, how could you do that? It seems so irrational and it seems so wrong in a way. But now, but you can, and if you observe the strict letter of the law and you don't work on norms, and often these things are on norms, sort of norms are out the window. And so you can do whatever, you can push the envelope, and unless it's in writing against the law, you can just do it.
So if we want to be a bit more activist about this, how can this cynicism, the growing cynicism in the political and legal process be addressed, I wonder, so that people can be given confidence in the legal system?
That's a great question. I don't really have a specific answer, or really even a general answer for that. I don't really know.
No.
I really love the strata design of Korzybski explaining the difference between political, judicial, and teaching, and he puts down that the teachers are in the area of what's called defining symbols. The judiciary is involved in defining symbols. Interpreting symbols. Interpreting the law. And the third part was politicians are in the job of manipulating symbols.
That's interesting.
That's from Korzybski, and we put that into a strata of how they fit in understanding language and form.
That's interesting. I don't remember that. That is interesting.
Yeah.
But in a way, that is interesting. That's an operational definition. I mean, you accept that as that's how he puts it, so that's how he defines it, and you either accept it or you don't. I mean, everyone really manipulates symbols in many ways. So
to an extent, yeah.
To an extent. I mean, certainly in law. I mean, again, the judges, I mean, they're all powerful in terms of defining what the law is and how it should be implemented. Although, whatever they say has to be then enforced if it's to be any good. I mean,
but don't they have to stick with precedent?
Well, they
don't
have to. But they can go against precedent. I mean, in this country, the Supreme Court goes against, segregation. In the 19th century, there was a Supreme Court decision, separate but equal. And in the 20th century, they said, no, but we're not going to do that. So and the precedent was there, and they simply overturned it. Same thing with Roe, with the abortion in this country, in our country. Roe pretty much legalized the abortion situation. And then a couple of years ago, the Supreme Court said, no, we're going to overturn it. So basically, they can do whatever they want, and they just have to come up with a legal rationale, which isn't that hard. Because, if you have a particular bias and want a decision to come out a particular way, you can find something in the law that will help you to do that.
Yeah, when you've got ChatGPT these days, you can really put an argument in.
Yeah, no, that's really true. You don't even need clerks anymore. You just, because the Supreme Court judges really don't write their opinions. It's a great job. You show up for work. You've got these brilliant people under you. From the top law schools here, Harvard, Yale. They clerk for the judges and they write the opinions. The judge says, I want the case to come out this way. And so these 20-year-olds go back and they write it up, and that's hundreds of pages, and that's their opinion, as if the judge wrote the opinion, which is, they didn't write it. I don't even know if they read it. But, yeah, I mean, it's they hardly work. They work a few months a year. It's just a great job. It's a lifetime appointment. It's better than lotto.
I suppose it brings a pension with it for when you finish.
But you don't even have to. Why would you finish? I mean, the job itself is a retirement job, I think.
Yes.
You're hardly working.
In this country, they say that you should never launch a royal commission unless you can control the outcome of it.